spec tests, and hopefully other teams can follow suit and just implement as like similarly as to what we are also adding right now.
All right. So I had a few points that I thought I'll cover. On the Etherspot side, we've, built upon what we'd already been working on and corrected few small changes to the metadata. And I had submitted a PR to the specification, which required us, there was a correction required in the request response message header. So Shahaf, if you can approve that PR, that would be great.
Yeah, okay. I'll look at it, and I'll review it once we are finished with the call.
Sure, that'll be great. And yeah, we've implemented Gossip Sub, and the build is undergoing alpha testing at the moment. Still, certain changes are required. I had a question there. During the initial call, we had agreed to publish the mempool IDs in a separate repository in ETH Infinitism, right? Can you please set up a repository for that?
Yeah, of course. I'll set up right now.
All right.
I see that you have joined.
Yeah, Yov is here. Hello, Yov.
Hi.
Hi. So going back, I'd forked Hive to add the necessary simulations for the P2P version. There is still an outstanding question whether we use Hive or rebuild on the bundler test executor suite that you have done. Because Hive, I think, is easier to understand and write simulations in, but we should agree on a common framework on how we proceed.
Well, I think that if you are already starting to use Hive in order to test your bundler, then we are open to just fork it and basically use that as well as the peer-to-peer layer tests. That's also fine.
Okay, fine. So I'll coordinate with you and submit the PR when it's ready. The question I had there with Hive is, I believe at the moment, the contribution to that is quite restricted, and it's controlled by Peter and others from Ethereum Foundation. And I believe they run their own hosted instance of that. So what is the plan for going forward? Are we going ahead and running or integrating the ERC 4337 specific test suite under that, or are we planning to run a separate hosted instance for this?
Well, I think we should separate them as long as the ERC is not enshrined to the protocol itself. I guess that it will be easier to, like if we use Hive, it will be easier to migrate later and like just add it to the original repo. But just forking it and changing everything from the backend side, that's completely fine in my opinion. We shouldn't. Or not that we shouldn't, but if it's difficult to push changes to Hive itself, then we can just fork it.
All right. Okay.
But then, we should fork it. But then, if we want, if we need help with from EF DevOps running it like they do with their instance of Hive, then I could talk to them. We could get help from DevOps to set it up if needed.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I think before we approach them, let's have something working at our end, and then probably we can submit a PR on that side. Cool. I think I pretty much covered. Yeah, one question. This is for every bundler implementation as such. I'm not sure how many of you have tested your version of the bundler with user.js. I had a chat with John and Hazim as well. We think the library is pretty useful, but we had to make slight changes because at the moment, anybody using, I believe on StackUp side, Hazim can give more details. In order to initialize user.op, you just need to provide a single URL, which apparently can be the bundler URL, but on StackUp, I believe they route ETH-specific calls to the appropriate underlying RPC network. But on Skanda, what we have done is we have created a wrapper around the underlying RPC. So you don't need to provide two separate URLs while interacting with the user operations. This bundler itself would route the ETH specific calls to the underlying RPC node. I just wanted to throw this out there to what others think, how they would like to proceed while using userop as a library for consuming user operations.
Okay, so it depends. The userop.js is obviously targeting JavaScript and TypeScript developers. So we, in our reference bundler, we didn't use it. Not, I think, simply because of the historical reasons. When we started implementing it, there were no other userop SDKs, obviously. But if TechUp is doing a good work on making it compatible with the latest changes, like keeping it updated, I don't see a reason why not using that in the future if it's more comfortable than what we already have.
Yeah, just to add to that. So yeah, when I built useop.js, I made the assumption that one RPC URL would be required to access both the bundler methods and the node methods. So yeah, so like how we do it at StackUp is we have an extra layer that routes bundler methods to a bundler instance, and then everything else to a node instance. I'm not sure if that's what everyone else is also planning to do, or do we want to like keep bundler RPCs separate from node RPCs?
I mean, from a developer experience, it helps if we just provide one RPC instance to initialize the userop object. So I'd go with just one rather than two. But I mean, I just want, we have enabled an command line option in the bundler to even wrap ETH calls so that the bundler itself could handle it. If userop becomes a standard for writing ERC 4337 based applications, and then it probably makes sense to have a standardized way in which to initialize the library rather than two different ways. So I mean, we had to do this because one of the developers reached out to us in our GitHub and raised an issue saying that our bundler is not compatible with userop. So we added that feature. So yeah, I thought I'll bring this up here because everyone is building. It's better all of us agree to some standard and continue to build that way.
Yeah, from our side, it's just a single RPC, so no issue on our end.
Vid and Mark?
Yeah, we haven't tried userop.js. Our public endpoints are only bundler.
Okay.
The one we host, we don't expect that the one we're hosting, we also provide a node, but we're trying to work with other RPC providers so that they can offer both a node and a bundler. So if they're gonna use our own like hosted endpoints, it's only a bundler endpoint, and then we're trying to make it so that it's a single URL.
Okay. So sorry, Vid.
Yeah, I also didn't check the library yet with our bundler. So I guess it won't work at the moment, but like if the library is going to get adopted, it makes sense to add this feature. Yeah.
Sounds good. Anybody else has any views on that?
Yeah, can this be handled using the reverse proxy, or is it better to be handled in the bundler itself?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Sharif.
Yeah. Can the routing be handled using the reverse proxy? Can this routing be handled? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we've done in Skanda. we just proxy it to the underlying RPC node. But yeah, you are free to implement it in any way you think is the right way to do it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it can be handled using Nginx or Apache, and yeah. So yeah, we'll see which is better. I don't know exactly, but yeah, it can be handled both.
Cool. I had nothing else on my points to discuss, so feel free to ask your questions or anything that you have.
Well, I had one question. It's not related directly to the protocol, but to all the bundlers. So you know that we're supposed to have support for alt mempools as well, which means basically having exceptions with different mempool IDs. Now, do all the bundlers have a way to also have a way to implement these some framework to implement these exceptions, or is this still TBD?
I mean, in the original P2P specification, I believe I added an additional criteria to list the list of mempool IDs that a given bundler can support. But I believe that broke the structure somewhere, so Shahaf had to revert that particular PR. We have to add it back, and Skanda at the moment supports multiple mempool IDs as such. But yeah, I'm not sure about the others. I think they can give their opinion on it.
So I think, but just to clarify, I mean, not just from the protocol standpoint for having multiple mempool IDs and the propagation, but also there are actual, each of these mempools is going to have its own set of exceptions, such as whitelisting some slots in some specific contract, and so. When you have so it's not just adding a mempool ID; it's also implementing these rules and associating them with this ID. And now the reason I'm bringing it now is a conversation with Circle about supporting Paymaster with supporting Paymaster for USDC, which I think everyone will agree that is a good idea. But it can't be done inside a protocol because of certain slots that they need to access. So if a bundler wants to support it, then this bundler would have to add a mempool to add an alt mempool with this specific exception. So I wanted to make sure that all the bundlers thought about how to add such exceptions when needed.
Yeah, Yoav, we're building one. We're talking to Circle too. I think the way that we're approaching it at this point is we're just building a pretty simple whitelist that just allows any address from any entity, so factory, aggregator, whatever entity type, to just bypass the entirety of the storage and opcode checking rules. With the idea that to get on the whitelist, it means there's some amount of kind of verification of the contracts that's been done. So I'm wondering if in your opinion that's too loose of a rule check of a kind of a rule checking whitelist, just to say, hey, we're just bypassing everything. You can just go through essentially without any tracing involved.
I think. Okay.
Oh, go on.
I think that if you talk specifically on Circle, maybe you could say that, okay, they are going to audit the Paymaster, and they are a huge, they're a huge company with a lot of stake in it. So maybe for them specifically, it's not going to be a problem. But what happens if you have many paymasters, each that needs a different kind of a relaxation of the rules, and they don't all have the same exact stake in the system, basically. So you would probably want to allow certain paymasters to do certain things, but maybe not allow all paymasters to just access, for example, band opcodes, because they may not even need that. So you are just basically opening up an attack surface that they don't use directly. On the other hand, like, it's not beneficial for the usability. On the other hand, if there is a bug and now you need to basically trust as many paymasters as people want to support, then you need to trust all of them that they have no vulnerability to DDoS your bundle. So I think that initially it's okay to implement it as just, okay, whitelist it, and that's allowed to do all, but like in the future, in the near future, we'd want some kind of hierarchy of what rules you are going to relax or not. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, so there's a few things that we were thinking about when we were thinking about how to do this efficiently in the bundler, and one of the things is that you have to be able to kind of route to the correct mempool in a way that is efficient. So you can't just like, I mean, you could apparently, I guess, just try it on every mempool that you have and just see if it passes any of them.
So first I wanted to say something about this, about alt mempools in general, and then we can talk about what's the efficient way to propagate. But first, this is part of the reason why we didn't want the file to specify to have a specific structure for the description, is that the rules may be more complex than just allowing a contract to perform to access certain slots. For example, suppose in the future you want to whitelist some token that is well audited, but it uses a banned opcode. And you can say that in this particular case, with a very specific pattern, it's okay to access block number because you know it's not going to expose it to any other code. Now, this is you will not. So clearly, you're not going to allow everyone to access this banned opcode, but you're going to let someone do it. So the exceptions could be exceptions to any of the rules, not just storage, which means that sometimes it will require code modifications in the bundler. It's not just configuration. It's in order to add a certain exception. And now, as for propagation, you don't have to test it against each mempool. We defined a flow. I can look for this message. I wrote a flow for it in the group sometime. But the idea is that when you evaluate the rules, when you look at the user op, let's say you receive the user op from another peer or from RPC, doesn't matter. Now you go through and you simulate it. Whenever it encounters it hits something that's supposed to not include it. It violates some rules, so it can be included in the alt mempool. So you check the exceptions. If it matches certain exceptions, then you keep going, but you also keep track of the fact that it's not in the which mempools it's going to match. At the end of the simulation, if it can still be added to one or more alt mempools, then you need to propagate it to these mempools. So you only simulate it once, but during the simulation, you see which exceptions get triggered and whether it can still be propagated to any of the mempools.
So are we then defining which of these are allowed to be skipped, or which rules are still allowed, which aren't for each mempool, or that's up to the team to specify?
I'm not trying to.
Sorry, let me rephrase. What I'm trying to say is, are we saying that all kinds of exceptions are allowed, or only certain things can be added as exceptions among the specified set of rules?
It depends on the mempool, no? I mean, it depends on the mempool rules that you allow.
Yeah, let's say you could have an alt mempool. You could have an alt mempool that allows pretty much anything you can think of. You can make any exception as long as this exception is known to be safe. So if you find if there is some pattern that uses banned opcodes, or you have something that accesses any storage and any violation of the rules, but you know it to be safe, you actually audited it, you know that this one is safe, you can suggest an alt mempool with this exception, and any bundler that agrees with you that it's safe or is willing to take this risk. For example, in the Circle case, there is a risk that they would pause the contract, but they are very unlikely to do so. So even though it could technically DOS you, you'll probably agree to add it. So it's so you can accept any set of now the definition of an alt mempool can have one or more exceptions. So when you go through the simulation, you have to see which ones are triggered, because it's possible that multiple exceptions are triggered by a certain user operation, so it doesn't match any of the mempools, because each of the mempool has a different set. So in that case, as soon as the set is empty, you're going to drop it and not continue the simulation. But if the simulation ends and it matches one or more alt mempool, then you propagate it to these mempools.
Right. Now, what I'm concerned is that because these exceptions are pretty loosely defined, and we are the YAML does not enforce any of these in a given format. Customization would then be too bundler specific, and each bundler might implement it a bit differently. So that's fine as long as yeah.
Then they can't be part of the same. If they don't implement the same thing, they can't be part of the same mempool, because they would treat each other as spammers and disconnect the peer. So it will have when you are adding, let's say a group of bundlers here decides to add support for Circle and they make a certain exception, then what they will have to do is to add a test for it to the test framework, just like all the other tests. And we say, so we're going to add an optional test to the test framework, to the bundler tests, saying that if you participate in this particular mempool, you need to pass these tests. And and they're going to test specifically for all of the exceptions in this mempool. So I think it's because if they are not compatible, they are not part of the same mempool.
Yeah.
So the implementation is going to be different in each bundler, clearly, but they have to implement the same exception.
Got it.
Yeah, I have a question about that. So wouldn't it make more sense to have some guidelines to how to write the specification for each alternative mempool? Because like if we have 10 alternative mempools and they are doing like similar things, but they each write specification in a different way, wouldn't be hard for bundlers to just implement the similar things?
So we wanted to keep the description open, because we can't anticipate all the possible ways people will want to make exceptions. It's it's not just saying that a certain slot is allowed or a certain opcode is allowed. It could be a different access pattern. We have we already have multi opcode cases, such as the way we allow gas. We allow gas only if it's immediately followed by a call. So let's say you add another such pattern. So we can't anticipate what it will look like. So if we want to make it a strict format, we need to think about all the possible ways you want to make an exception, and I don't think we could really do that. So we don't know enough about about what kind of exceptions we'll need in the future. Could be, for example, that you allow a certain opcode, but or a certain pattern only if it's used once, or only if it's used in the second level, but not in the third level, of the call stack. So we don't know. We'll need to define the safety of each alt mempool by looking at what's the exception we need to do. So we thought that maybe having an open description, just describe it in English, and then bundlers can look at. You can have one reference implementation. So I think let's say you are the one who wants to set up this alt mempool. So what you could do is you could implement it in the reference bundler. For example, you can send a pull request doing it like adding support for it in the reference bundler, which everyone can look at, or doing And then you can refer to it and say, this is an example of how to implement these rules, and everyone else can follow. And the description just says what these exceptions do. Does that make sense, or do you see a better way?
No,
You're cutting out. I think you're cutting out. I couldn't hear you.
Probably turning off your video might help.
Okay, let's try now. Can you repeat this, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, much better.
Yeah, I was just thinking not like the strict format, but just like some most common patterns for exceptions to have like some guidelines how to write them.
Yeah, we could have a common way to describe exceptions that we already know we'll want to have, such as a list of storage slots in a list of contracts. We just don't want, but we don't want to limit it. There need to be a way to describe something that we haven't thought of before.
In general, I think that when discussing alt mempools, they're going to be driven by use case, just like Circle, for example, right now. So having these kind of discussions and getting to the specifics of what they need, and then to agree and even write it as a spec of this specific alternate mempool, just writing a spec for that, and then follow, like having everyone follow that alt mempool spec. That's also I think is a fine way to just approach each mempool, because you're not really going to have, as you have said, a broad brush of how to change rules for mempools. Okay, that's going to be decided per each use case, I believe.
I feel like I'm concerned about alt mempools from a development perspective in general. Is just like, if every mempool has its own way of defining rules and they're all arbitrary, like from a development perspective, everyone's going to have like a one-off development cycle to like support a particular mempool. So at some point we are going to have to standardize on a list of rules. I think though we don't exactly know what those are yet, so it makes sense to keep it open, but we should probably try to drive towards some sort of standardization over time.
Yeah,
no, I agree. We just deferred it. We just deferred it until we know what these exceptions start to look like. So initially we kept it open, but let's say after you have, I don't know, let's say you do 10 alt mempools, you do 10 or 20 alt mempools, and you start seeing a pattern, and you don't write different code for each time. Like for example, when you add exceptions for certain slots in a contract, you're going to have this code once, and now we're going to define rules for when to use it. So after these patterns start to emerge, we can start adding it as a standard to description, and at some point we'll have a format for it. I just thought that it would be premature to define it as part of the specs from day one before we see actual alt mempools.
Fair enough. I mean, it is understandable that we all bundlers might have to refactor their architecture once these become evident, but let's hope the changes are to a minimum.
Yeah, it's very early. We don't even have the mempool running yet. But the reason I'm bringing this up today is Circle. I want to make sure that I want to make sure that all the bundlers think about how to implement even at least basic. This basic rule of allowing access to this slot, so that anyone who does want to support Circle directly as an alt mempool can do so.
Do we have a link to that, the set of rules that Circle expects?
Sorry?
I mean, the Circle alt mempool that you were referring to, is there a link to the exceptions that...
No, we haven't. we haven't defined the exceptions. We're going to work with. I mean, we should all work with them to understand exactly what's needed and define the exception. Should make it as strict as as strict as possible while allowing what they need.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So yeah, we'll work with them because I think that shortly after we launch the mempool, we'll also want to have the first alt mempool, which is likely going to be this one.
Okay. Yeah, it'll help if once they have defined the exceptions, then we can probably, as bundlers, implementers, start supporting or agreeing on some standard to be followed for that.
Yeah, I think that since it's also the first one, we'll probably be the ones to add it to the reference bundler as an example. So you'll be able to also look. You'll be able to also look at how we implement the exceptions. Right, Shahaf, I think this will make sense for us, right?
Yeah. We are going to. We are currently discussing with circles. So we are currently adding not only the alternate pool. We are adding support for peer-to-peer, so we can have these kind of exceptions. But yes, once we agree on something with circle, we are going to add it to our reference implementation. And as you have said, this is something that will be standardized in time. So right now we don't really know how the rule looks like, how each exception looks like, and what is going to be more common and what's not. So I agree basically with what you said before.
Thank you.
All right. So do we have anything else?
Nothing from my side. Anything from the others? All right. If no further questions, yeah. Have a nice day, everyone. Let's meet in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
Sure, yeah, bye.
Let's
Have a
meet
nice
in
day.
2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Take care.